American exceptionalism was born in the unusual circumstances of colonizing not a new world, but a world filled with populations across the American continent, with Native Americans who had first to be pushed aside systematically over a period of 3 centuries. And so there was a lot of genocide, and there was slavery. And so from the very beginning, not quite the very beginning, but by the end of the 17th century, there were 2 fronts of war underway, or 2 fronts of violence. One was the violence of a growing slave population in the Caribbean, and then in the southern part of the North American continent, and the wars against the Native American populations. And even during this period, though, there was an extraordinary hubris of this new country when the United States won its independence from England with the support of France, because just a few decades later, the United States told Europe, don't meddle in all of the Americas. That's our backyard to meddle in, which was a rather hubristic idea, the Monroe Doctrine. But early on, even before the U.S. could project much power, it was already with a vision of a larger gaze in the world. The 19th century in the United States was the century of first following England's industrialization and then surpassing England in economic might. And but domestically, the United States had the business of a civil war to settle the question of slavery. And then it had the Indian Wars throughout the 19th century to settle the question of the Native American populations. And those were quite brutal wars. Of course, the Civil War was the most brutal that the United States ever fought on its, and the wars against the Native American populations were a continuing series of genocides. And the president that Trump most admires, Andrew Jackson, was a genocidal, homicidal president, probably with the most perverse personality of any president we've ever had until Trump arrived. And probably, from all I can gather, a rival of Trump in antisocial personality disorder, but a really nasty man who pushed the native populations to the west of the Mississippi River. Well, by the end of the 19th century, those wars were over, and America looked around, the leadership looked around, and our role model, Britain, had made a worldwide empire, and France had its empire, and even Spain kept some of its empire a little bit. Portugal kept a little bit of its empire. Italy was a wannabe imperial power, so it would try and again to invade Ethiopia. And the United States decided it wanted its empire also, and so it needed a good war in 1898. When a battleship boiler exploded in Havana Harbor in 1898, decided that was a good time to invade Havana and have a war with Spain and gain its first overseas colonies, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, 2 of which we've given up. One is bankrupt and still reeling from a massive hurricane last year and still in America's colonial hands. And I think it's right to say that this building of the overseas empire starting in 1898 became the business of the 20th century of U.S. foreign policy. For the first 30 years, it was repeated invasions of Central America and the Caribbean. because we sent in the Marines every couple of years to collect debts from countries or to run countries or to grab a piece of Colombia to make it Panama, to build a canal that would be under U.S. ownership. And through the 1930s, America got its experience in overseas projection of power. And then World War II, of course, was the decisive, most horrific war in human history, and the one that finally, in effect, ended the British Empire and passed the baton to the U.S. Empire at the end of World War II. And modern American foreign policy picks up at that point. And there really were two visions of American foreign policy, still built on an even more exceptionalist self-vision at this point, because now the U.S. was the most powerful country in the world, the technologically most advanced country by far, the only major power in the world that had fought World War II with only one day of battle on its own soil, the attack on Pearl Harbor. But other than that, a country that was not only intact, but had a war that led to the most remarkable industrialization and technological advancement imaginable. And at the end of World War II, also with the development of the atomic bomb, the United States completely reigned supreme in the world as, I would say then, applicable phrase, an exceptional country. It was the only country of power at that time that had all of these attributes of economic might, massive technological advancement, unique military capacity, and an economic reach that was already worldwide in influence. And with Britain in crisis, deep debt at the end of World War II, the United States saw its global leadership come to fruition with two interrelated viewpoints. One was Roosevelt's vision. Roosevelt I regard as America's greatest president by far, I would say, in a way. But he had the vision of the United Nations and the idea of a collective security to build a world of peace based on a charter, based on principles, international law, and an international institution that would keep the peace, being the UN Security Council. A second vision was not a collective security, but a U.S.-led security. And especially since the Cold War began to unfold immediately at the end of World War II, and that's a very complex and much contested history. But I would say it was a Cold War that was not an inevitable battle of a ruthlessly expansionist Soviet Union, but was a detour of history that was extraordinarily dangerous, costly, and didn't have to happen, actually, is my own understanding of the Cold War.